All right, welcome to AES. We are here with a very special guest. My name is Mitch Thomas. I'm from Soundtoys. I'm going to allow this gentleman to introduce himself.
I'm Bob Ohlsson. I'm from Crazy.
Yeah, the crazy part is what this gentleman has done in his career. Can you tell us a bit about your history, where you come from?
Okay, well, it all started in the sixth grade, and my class wanted to do the teacher wanted us to do a radio show. And I walked into the radio studio to do our final performance, took one look at the control room, and becoming a railroad engineer went right out the window. I wanted to be in that control room. It was a perfect place for a nerd.
And
Didn't have to interact with people, I thought. I mean, what a dream. The only bigger dream was later on, I hung out in studios and saw a cutting room, and man, sitting there cutting discs was heaven.
And you ended up in a very special studio at one point?
Yeah, the cutting room I wound up working in was at Motown in Detroit, and I did that for, 65 to 68 roughly.
Wait, 65 to 68. There were some pretty big artists going through that studio, right?
Yeah. And then in 68, one of their most successful production teams quit, took 3 engineers with them. They desperately needed somebody in the studio. They knew I had a little musical background, and I got hauled out of nerd heaven and thrown in the control room with a crash course in engineering from my boss and from his boss, who I later learned my boss came from Atlantic Records, and his boss came from Gold Star Studio in LA, and before that he had been at United Western. So I basically got the PhD in recording, only I didn't even know it.
You got force-fed being a doctor.
Yeah.
So, just drop a couple names of the artists that you work with.
Well, I did all of Motown's vocals for about 2 years, and that was Stevie Wonder and the Four Tops and Temptations and Marvin Gaye.
Wow. So it's a bunch of iconic stuff, and you worked all the vocals on those.
Yeah.
What any kind of cool gear or uncool gear?
Well, at that time, we were using Neumann KM86s for everything. They had switched to that. Well, they wanted transistor mics. They were tired of dealing with the power supplies and all the stuff with the tube mics. And so they wanted transistor mics, and Neumann had these nice transistor mics, and they really loved. We had a Neumann SM2 stereo small diaphragm, and they really liked that better than the large diaphragm U47s and U67s. So they bought all KM86s, which was a small condenser 3-pattern. It's basically 2 KM84s back to back.
Wow. Sorry, I'm just kind of nerding out on all the gear over here.
So that was it, and about the same time we bought a second studio, and the second studio didn't sound as good as the first one, but the second studio had a board with 14 Neumann equalizers in them, which are almost identical to this new plug-in.
Yeah, that was great. We're lucky enough to have Bob beta testing with us. We're very fortunate. Thank you for your input. It's invaluable to have someone of this caliber going, hey, this stinks, or hey, this is great, which fortunately you enjoyed the new CQ plugin.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed it, and I am old school enough that I want everything to have 20 dB of headroom, so I don't hit modeled plugins hard. Big mistake.
Yeah.
Because the tube stuff had 20, 30 dB of headroom. I mean, that's something people don't realize. Nobody was running tube gear into saturation.
Right, I heard part of that conversation yesterday or the other day when you were by. I was talking about the headroom and why it was important and why people didn't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that was what was great at RCA in Nashville. The guy used to actually pull the tube on the RCA limiters. They had like bus limiters.
Right.
And he'd pull the tube on the bus limiters and use the amplifier in it just to get gain back so he could run the console at a lower level and have more headroom. That
Wow.
was one of the secrets of the pristine Nashville sound.
The no tube mixer.
Yeah, well, the no tube, well, it wasn't no tube, but the whatever, it was a Varimu RCA compressor,
Right.
and there was one tube that made it compress, and if you yanked that tube out, it became just a real good amplifier.
Secrets.
And back then, your compressor, to sell audio gear in the U.S., your big market was broadcast stations, and broadcast stations were not inclined to buy anything that couldn't drive the telephone line to transmitter in a pinch. So, unlike in Europe, our stuff clipped at plus 40. I mean, way up there, because they sometimes, if it get pinched into that, that was the case. So the reason the tube gear sounded so good and we loved it was because you could put a bass drum into a tube console and just pull a fader down, not worry about pads, not worry about nothing, and it still sounded good.
And
headroom is a wonderful thing.
and you worked with some limited resources at Motown. They didn't have like a 52 channel console or anything like that, right?
Well, the new studio had been a 4-track studio, and we upped it to 16.
Wow.
And the console was, I believe, an 18-in console. It only had 14 channels of EQ. But it was the only console we had that had any EQ. In the mix rooms and the old studio, it was all outboard.
Wow.
It was Pultex, or we loved the Langevin graphics, and so we made up our own version of it that's now called the Motown EQ, but it's really just the Langevin passive with a booster amp, so you could plug it in anywhere and not have to worry about putting a booster amp after it in addition to, it's just easier to deal with. And it had switches because the originals, the sliders would crap out all the time. They were probably the least reliable thing in the studio, so they got some real expensive switches, and those were the others. So each studio had 4 or 5 of those guys and 4 or 5 Pultex.
Wow, nice. That was when you had to work for it. You had to work to get the sound. It wasn't magic, right? So
you had to work for it, but a big part of it. I mean, we just did a panel, and I was telling them about one of my biggest aha moments was I didn't like the piano sound I was getting. And I brought in all kinds of mics and tried all kinds of stuff. I just thought it was mushy. Didn't care for it. And then one day I'm working on a thing, and Valerie Simpson was producing it, and she went over to show the piano player a little figure that she wanted in the song. And all of a sudden I heard the best piano sound I'd ever heard in my life come out of the monitors with the same setup. And it was like, oh, I'd learned about touch.
you were talking about the level of players that were there.
Yeah, and I really had no idea. Even then, I had no idea of the quality of the players until I moved to San Francisco and started recording rock bands.
No offense to rock bands. Yeah, that's impressive. So, is there any project from the Motown days that was really still very, very important to you? I'm just curious.
Well, the high point of my career was a Spinners song called "It's a Shame," the vocal session. It was Stevie Wonder's first production. We went in, and I set it up, and the lead singer, G.C. Cameron, went out in the studio. Stevie told him, well, go up to the vamp, but hold off, because I don't want you to blow your voice out till we get it right. G.C. nailed that song in that first take. We're all sitting there with chills, the look on Stevie's face and Sarita's face blew my mind. And it was like in 3 minutes, we knew, number one, it was a hit song. Number two, Stevie was going to have a career as a producer. And as they say, the rest was history. But to have all of that happen in 1 3-minute period was a mind-boggling experience.
And working with all those vocalists, who was your favorite? Who was the voice you liked the best?
Levi, the Four Tops.
Yeah, that's the top of the list. You mentioned him the other day too, and I was like, yeah, you cannot get away from that voice. That's for sure.
Oh, he never sang anything twice that the second time wasn't better, or 3 times, or 5 times, and it was all about when the producer was tired and wanted to go home. Because he was going to be better every time you took it, and they finally figured that out, that when does this become pointless?
Wow, that's amazing.
So I really liked him, and
any of the ladies?
Gladys Knight was very good.
Huge Glass Knight. I won't say anything but my childhood was Glass Knight. That doesn't mean you're old.
Did you ever hear her pre-Motown hit?
I don't know that I did.
I don't know the name of it, but she
you?
had one. Motown was the second label she was on.
Wow. You didn't.
A lot of people don't. No, it was done in New York.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. I'll have to try to check that down. Because I really love her voice. It's just amazing. All right. Well, I don't want to take all of your time because I know you've got a lot of folks to see because you're super iconic and.
I've been a fly on some amazing walls. I'd say that's the.
That's a great out.
You know, I didn't screw it up. But that's about as far as I can.
Well, we thank you very much for everything you do for Sound Toys, and we thank you for coming by and talking with us and sharing those awesome stories. I know you got tons more, but I don't want to keep you stuck here. So thank you, Bob. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks. That was awesome. Thank you, sir.